And their New World Order is essentially a plan to have, basically get rid of any kind of middle-class structure. They basically want a global workforce of essentially slaves and a population which is completely devoid of any hope or will to resist, which will basically just do whatever it's told. And then once you achieve that, of course, the next step is you get rid of religion. You completely eradicate a religion, and that's what these governments and the system is trying to do. Mm-hmm. It's trying to convince the population of the earth that there is no hope for believers. There's no God. There's no hope, and you should basically put your faith in the governments, the big corporations. You should put your faith in the system. And that's the only thing that will save you. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to eradicate faith from the face of the earth.
Here in Indiana, the state representatives were ordered by the citizens to incorporate a constitutional amendment to the Indiana State Constitution to ban gay marriage. But the newspaper, the #1 newspaper, and probably the only newspaper of note in Indiana, the Indianapolis Star, continued to roll out stories of corporations and how they objected to that. And I'm thinking, okay, why don't you people just stick to business? Why are you interested in that topic? And there was, although the will of the people had brought the amendment all the way up to be voted on, the Indianapolis Star turned the representatives around by continuing to say that the corporations would leave the state of Indiana, and it was defeated. So I see that as a way, and whether you're for it or whether you're against it, it was obvious that the corporations had dictated the law here in Indiana, and that we had a change in time here. We went to a daylight savings time, and that was dictated by the corporations. And we have highways in Indiana that have been leased out to foreign nations. So it does seem that corporations are controlling events, and that even the will of the people are thwarted. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly what's happening. It's interesting that one of the points I make in Satan's government is that people talk about, communism versus a free market democracy, and I try to make the point that in the world we live in, there's two sides of the same coin. The corporate dominated culture we live under is not much different from communism. Instead of a communist government having all the power, we live under a system where it's just a triumvirate of corporations and banks and governments that together hold all the power. Mm-hmm. But it's the same thing, and absolutely, I think I've studied a great deal into the influence of large corporations in the world, and it's absolutely true that large corporations, either through direct lobbying, which of course is very legal, so it's not even anything they have to hide, either through direct lobbying or through bribes or financial influence, or they are absolutely influencing culture and thinking, and so of course they're working together, because what's good for large corporations is good for the government. I mean, the government is making a huge amount of taxes from corporations, so corporations don't have any difficulty whatsoever convincing public officials, or anyone for that matter, to do things their way.
Mm-hmm. We have this question from Paul. He wants to know, in the face of all the evil that is against us, that is arrayed against the average Earth citizen, how can one maintain sort of a hope, or without being, a hope or a joy or something, without going into total depression, and actually request maybe for some drugs, mood-altering drugs?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question, and the Bible answers that question. I would encourage that listener to, of course, continue to study the scriptures and pray. But the answer, I believe, it's been the answer for me in my life, is we must always look to God, and we must put our devotion to God above everything, including our own lives. And it says in the Bible, he who seeks to save his life will lose it, and he who seeks to lose his life will find it. And I believe what that means is it's only when one stops living for his own interests and totally yields to God's will and tries to turn his life over to God, to let God use one's life to do good, mm-hmm. only then will you find peace and you will lose your fear of death, and you will lose your anxieties, because you'll realize that what's at stake is far greater than the life of any individual. It's the future of humanity that's at stake. God has a plan. God's way will prevail. The scriptures make it clear that despite the horrendous suffering and the horrendous evil that's been taking place and that is taking place, in the end, God's people will be redeemed, will be saved, and will live eternally. That's what the scripture makes clear, and Christians should never lose sight of that promise. God's promise cannot be broken.
Okay.
So the answer is don't lose faith, don't lose hope.
Okay. Let me ask you, and we're talking about the seat of power, and of course, for a lot of people, the seat of power is emblematic of I don't know how they even call themselves holy, but whatever, the Pope and Rome and the Vatican. A lot of people contend that is the actual seat of power. What's your view on that?
Well, I have heard that theory. I have actually. I've read the book, and maybe many of your readers have read the book, Mystery Babylon the Great. It's a book which talks about the Catholic Church and its origins. I personally don't care to specifically condemn any church group. I believe there are thousands of millions of Catholic people who themselves are, in their hearts, are devout believers and are struggling to live their lives in accordance with God's will. However, the Catholic Church as a whole, if you look at the events which have unfolded and I won't be very specific, but I'm sure your listeners know what I'm speaking of. If you look at many of the events that have unfolded in recent years in the United States, implicating high-ranking members of the Catholic Church, I mean, one has to wonder about where the priorities lie.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to wonder why so many Catholic priests are raping kids. Has that ever been part of your wondering?
Absolutely. I mean, what I found really troubling was how long it appears to have been forcefully covered up. So I mean, I think it's apparent to anyone who studies, especially the Book of Revelation, and then looks at some of those scriptures and prophecies and puts that together with the events we see, that it's clear that at the highest levels there are organizations, many of which call themselves religious, which are engaged in some very evil activities.
Okay. We have this question from Dean. He wants to know, how is the educational system being used against us?
Oh, the educational system is one of the most pivotal and crucial elements the system is using to assault humanity, to assault Christianity. I think most Westerners, most people in the U.S. and Canada are well familiar with many of the news stories where governments and educational systems have been trying to eradicate the Lord's Prayer, trying to eradicate Bible study, trying to enforce that only evolution should be taught in schools. There are so many examples of how the educational system has been used to promote anti-Christian concepts, such as homosexuality. I mean, in many cases, the schools will try to teach kids that they should be tolerant or should accept the concept of homosexuality. I mean, so it's clear. I mean, there's a scripture in the Bible where Christ says, if anyone leads one of these little ones astray, it would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and be flung into the sea. I mean, it's one of the worst sins you can commit, to corrupt the mind of an innocent young child. So this is a horrendous thing that's going on. Now, I make the point in my book, Satan's Government, that individual teachers are not evil. I mean,